dramatically, especially here in the past 2 years, because we, a couple of years ago, had some national ADHD guidelines, which put ADHD at the forefront of people's minds in both general practice and within the general community. So a lot of people are talking about ADHD these days, but unfortunately it is very difficult for people to access reliable and objective assessment services. So I'm not going to be going over how to do a full ADHD diagnostic assessment in the 30 or 40 minutes I'll be speaking with you today, but I'd like to speak to you about what ADHD is in general, as well as how to screen for it. So I'll do the introduction and screening, and Dr. Jackie can do her part, which is looking at cognitive testing to screen for ADHD, including some novel approaches that Dr. Jackie and I have been researching recently. So, what is ADHD? It is a diagnosis that's found in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, and we're currently up to version 5. We're actually up to version 5 text revision, but version 5 was first published about 12 years ago. And the DSM is called the Bible of Psychiatry because it contains all of the diagnoses that psychiatrists tend to deal with, and ADHD is certainly one of them. It is a neurodevelopmental disorder. I've already used that term a few times, and I just want to bring to your attention the main difference between a neurodevelopmental disorder and a neurocognitive disorder. A neurodevelopmental disorder is one stay seated or can't stay still for long. They tend to intrude into other people's activities. They tend to speak over other people, not wait their turn, and things like that. Importantly, ADHD often persists into adulthood, and even though it is first typically diagnosed in childhood. So in children, it can be quite impairing in terms of hindering a child's ability to capitalise on their educational opportunities. But in adults, it can also be impairing in terms of hindering occupational functioning and relationships. So there are two broad types of symptoms. The first is the inattention symptoms, and this is criterion A1 in the DSM. And I'm going to briefly go through each of the symptoms, and 6 or more of these symptoms need to have been present for at least 6 months and to have also been evident prior to the age of 12 years old. These symptoms are failing to give close attention to details or making careless mistakes. Now, in childhood, this can appear such as in mathematics, if the person's doing mathematical sums and they don't carry the numbers properly from one line to the next. Or it could just be silly mistakes like typos when they're typing up text. So poor attention to detail. The second one is difficulty sustaining attention. So there are different types of attention, of course, that the human brain subserves. And sustaining attention is a role of the frontal lobes, especially the right frontal lobe, and it's associated with the neurotransmitter noradrenaline. So it can be presumed that people with ADHD are deficient in noradrenaline, and this is partly why they have trouble sustaining their attention. So they can't concentrate for lengthy periods of time. Another one of the symptoms is they do not seem to listen when spoken to directly. So even in a conversation, the person with ADHD might have their mind wander. They might be daydreaming or thinking of something else. Often, a person with ADHD may not follow through on instructions. So they might be given, let's say, 2 or 3 instructions. They might do the first one and then completely forget about the second or third, or get sidetracked or derailed and not come back to the task at hand. Sorry, I just realised the Arabic presentation is a little bit delayed there for the Arabic readers in the room. So these are 4 of the inattention symptoms. I'll go to the next slide that contains another 5. So the next one is difficulty organising tasks. So the person with ADHD classically has trouble organising things. They tend not to have the things they need when they need it. They might forget things at home that they should have brought to uni or should have taken to work. And their workspaces are often very disorganised. Things are not where they should be. There's a lot of mess and clutter. So that can be a problem. The next symptom is the person often avoids, dislikes, or is reluctant to engage in tasks that require mental effort, especially sustained mental effort. So people with ADHD can actually can do a lot, but they tend to gravitate towards things that are easy rather than things that are hard or effortful. So classically, a person with ADHD who's a university student, they might delay or put off doing that really hard assignment because it's going to require too much mental effort, and they would rather play computer games or watch a movie or do something a little bit easier and more enjoyable. The next one is often loses things necessary for tasks. So the person can be forgetful and misplace things. This could be related to the difficulty organising things. So if they're disorganised and they don't keep their things in the right place, then it's obviously easy for them to lose those things. Criterion H under inattention is often easily distracted by extraneous stimuli. So the person with ADHD will have their attention taken away from tasks that they should be focusing on very easily. So if someone walks in the room or they hear something on the radio or a podcast, it could easily grab their attention, and then they can leave the task that they were doing in order to pursue that distraction. And they're often forgetful in daily activities. So they, in terms of adults with ADHD, they might forget to do really important things like pay their bills or attend important appointments. So they're the first set of symptoms, which are the inattention symptoms, and then the second set of symptoms are the hyperactivity or impulsivity symptoms. And if a person has 6 or more of the following that have persisted for at least 6 months, then they might qualify for the hyperactive or impulsive subtype of ADHD. but I'll tell you a little bit more about the subtypes after the next couple of slides. So those with hyperactivity and impulsivity will fidget or tap with their hands or feet. I did an assessment with a man yesterday in his 40s who's never been diagnosed with ADHD, and he was with me for 4 hours. I did a very detailed and comprehensive neuropsychological assessment with him, and he was fidgeting the whole time. So I did some screening for ADHD, and even though he had a brain injury when he was 13 years old, there is evidence that even before his brain injury, he likely fulfilled criteria for ADHD, and it was very clear from his restlessness and fidgeting. The person with this subtype of symptoms might leave their seat in situations where they're expected to remain seated, like in classrooms or lecture theatres, such as where you're presently located. They might often run about or climb in situations where it's inappropriate. Now, that criterion is more relevant to children. There are very few adults who will just get up and spontaneously run or climb things, but that's still a criterion in the DSM. They might be unable to play or engage in leisure activities quietly, so it's very difficult for them to just be calm and quiet and not symptoms. Remember, ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition, meaning it has to have first manifested in the developmental period, in other words, in childhood. And in addition to the requirement for the symptoms to occur prior to the age of 12, the symptoms have to be present or observable in 2 or more settings. It can't just be that the person has those symptoms at school but not at home. In childhood, they are required to have the symptoms in two settings, and the 2 obvious ones are school and home. In adults, it's usually at work and or at home. And the other important element that needs to be in evidence before a diagnosis is made is the symptoms have to interfere with or reduce the quality of social, academic or occupational functioning. So I have a lot of students who come up to me and say, I think I've got ADHD. It's probably not the case, because if you're a student that has been getting through your studies in a reasonable time frame, then you have been succeeding, and even though you might have some ADHD sort of phenomena, it doesn't mean you have ADHD, especially if there's no evidence that it's interfered with your functioning. other causes have to be excluded. So the symptoms can't occur exclusively during the course of another mental health condition like schizophrenia or psychosis or even depression or anxiety or substance use. All of those conditions can cause some of the symptoms that we see in ADHD. So we can't count a symptom of depression as a symptom for ADHD if the person's overall presentation is better explained by depression. So there are 3 subtypes. I'll put them all up and show you the Arabic text as well. So if the person meets 6 criteria in the inattentive symptoms list, then they might be said to have ADHD with a predominantly inattentive presentation. If they have 6 symptoms of hyperactivity but not inattention, they might have ADHD with predominantly hyperactive and impulsive presentation. But if they have 6 or more symptoms from both categories, then the person could be diagnosed with ADHD with combined presentation. And there are interesting differences, for example, between males and females in how these symptoms present. Firstly, let's look at the prevalence of ADHD. ADHD, pretty much around the world, occurs in about 5% of young people aged under 18 years of age, and in about 2.5% of adults aged over 18 years of age. In treatment-seeking populations, so these are people who tend to present to psychologists or psychiatrists, ADHD is quite common. It's seen in about 17% of the population seeking treatment. The male to female ratio is about 1.6 to 1 in adults, and in children it's about 2 to 1. So for every 2 males, there's 1 female with ADHD in childhood. And females are more likely to have the inattentive presentation rather than the hyperactive presentation. Now, in a recent study published last year, a whopping 34.7% of university students in the United Arab Emirates, aged 18 to 20, reported symptoms suggestive of probable ADHD. Now, this is probably a huge overestimate, and don't worry if you're a university student, this doesn't mean you've got a 1 in 3 risk of having ADHD. The screening tool they used in this study did not ask the key questions of, did you have these symptoms prior to the age of 12, and did these symptoms or do these symptoms interfere in your occupational or daily functioning? But it just shows you how common the symptoms of ADHD are in the general population. So, I am now going to briefly show you one of the most common tools used to screen for ADHD, and by the way, it is the tool that they used in this study in the United Arab Emirates, and it's called the ASRS, which is the ADHD Self-Report Scale, and it's designed for adults. In terms of its format, it has 18 questions and 2 parts, Part A and Part B, and it has a 5-point rating scale. It takes 5 to 10 minutes to administer this test, and it's based on self-report of current symptoms of ADHD. It's got respectable psychometric properties with internal reliability between 0.88 and 0.95. So it contains items that are sensitive to ADHD, and it has 2 subscales, the inattention and the hyperactivity subscales. And this is what it looks like in English. I couldn't find an Arabic version, and I'm sorry if that print is a little bit small. But here is Part A that has 6 questions, and so the questions basically follow the diagnostic criteria. But it should be noted that The ASRS was designed and developed on the basis of the DSM-4 criteria for ADHD, but they're not terribly different to the DSM-5 criteria. So the questions are, I won't go through all of them, but the examples are, how often do you have trouble wrapping up the final details of a project once the challenging parts have been done? And so the options are never, rarely, sometimes, often, very often. Now, the way that the form is produced, and by the way, this is a scale that was developed by the World Health Organization. It's freely available. If you Google adult ASRS, you'll be taken to the World Health Organization site and you can download this for free. Now, if someone, for item number 1, answers sometimes, often, or very often, you would count that as contributing to ADHD symptomology. But if they answer in the non-shaded boxes, you wouldn't count that as a symptom for ADHD. So the next question is, how often do you have difficulty getting things in order when you have to do a task that requires organisation? Number 3, how often do you have problems remembering appointments or obligations? And so on and so forth. So that's part A. And then there's part B that has quite a few more questions, and this follows a similar format. So if a person responds in the shaded boxes, then those responses count towards likely having a diagnosis of ADHD. I'm not going to go through the cut scores and the thresholds that are required. That's explained all very clearly in the ASRS documentation. But Dr. Jackie has informed me that of all the screening measures that are used to screen for ADHD in Egypt, the ASRS is probably the most common one, so you may already be familiar with it. But I just wanted to show you the tool. It's very simple, very quick, very easy. You can do it for yourself, you can do it for any of the people you work with if you're a counsellor or a psychologist, and it will give you an indication of whether or not the person may have ADHD, but of course you can't use any screening test to make a diagnosis. So if you're a healthcare professional, you can use the ASRS as a tool to screen for ADHD in adult patients, but not to make a diagnosis. If someone screens positive for ADHD on the ASRS, then what that means is you need to do a more in-depth clinical interview using the DSM-5 criteria to be sure that it is in fact an ADHD diagnosis. And of course you would focus on whether or not those symptoms were present prior to the age of 12 and whether or not those symptoms present in 2 or more areas of life and have a negative impact or disrupt functioning in at least one major domain of life. If, however, someone screens negative on the ASRS, it is highly unlikely that they have ADHD. And I've had a lot of people who are concerned, they might have read about ADHD in the media or seen something on TikTok about ADHD. They're very concerned and they come to me and say, oh, Janie, I think I've got ADHD. I give them the ASRS. And if the ASRS says they're unlikely to have ADHD, that satisfies me that they are highly unlikely to have ADHD because it's got a high negative predictive power but low positive predictive power. And what that means in English or lay speak is it's likely to capture ADHD when it's present. But it might capture other things as well. It might capture depression, it might capture acquired brain injury, it might capture psychosis, because these are all things that can masquerade as ADHD. So it casts a very wide net. And that is the end of my presentation today, and I'm very happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jamie. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I had the idea that we should probably hold questions until I give my portion of the presentation. that's okay with you? All right. So, gentlemen in the control room, if you wouldn't mind, I'm trying to present from the laptop screen. That's great. All right. So, while we're talking about ADHD, what I want to know is what you guys think is the main problem with ADHD screening. Go.
I'm kind of cheating because I know the answer.
Yeah, that's not fair. You worked with me before. Okay, go ahead.
It's based on self-report.
Correct. Can you guys see the problem with self-report? What would be the problem with it? Of course. Go ahead. What is your name? Okay, go ahead.
Overdiagnosis.
Overdiagnosis. Overdiagnosis based on suggestion. Is that what you said? Correct. Any other responses or thoughts? Go. Yes. I'll go. Say again? Social desirability. People want to have ADHD?
No, they just they might lie to they could want to seem like they have ADHD, or they might lie and seem like they don't want to be diagnosed with ADHD because they're reporting themselves.
Oh, okay. Right. So that's an inherent bias in self-report is people will lie or not even know the truth about their own selves, right? We all lie to our own self. Did you have a response to it?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. People may have a lack of insight, which may affect their results or their responses to the items which might affect the results.
That's correct. People have a lack of self-awareness, right? They're not introspective enough to know, but also we only know our own experiences. So how can you know relative to somebody else what you're experiencing? Possible?
Also cultural norms, some cultural norms,
Cultural norms, yes.
some behavior of ADHD and childhood or an adult, they consider it's normal, just not child.
Exactly right. Oh, that's just that kid, they just like to play a lot, right? They don't like to sit still. There's nothing wrong with that. Why should there be anything wrong with this? Marco, with your hand up? Okay. Shock?
Also, some responses can be very situational. For example, if you're asking if someone is struggling to start on a task, it could be a time where they are under a lot of stress from things in their environment, so they are struggling because of the stress.
Correct. So in certain contexts, they might display symptoms or not display symptoms of ADHD or display symptoms when they don't actually have it. That's a really good point. Okay, so you guys are obviously very familiar with the topic, and so I'm glad I have a well-informed, smart, engaged audience. That will make the rest of my presentation so much better. For being so smart, so can you clap for yourselves? All right, good. So one of the things that I believe we can do to fix the problem with self-report is to just give people a score. And the score is but the score is based on how they psychology in the laboratory. So all you all know me know that I'm a cognitive psychologist. I study attention, perception, memory, and generally speaking, most of the population I work with is not clinical. I work with people who are normal, everyday people, and I'm trying to find out, and they must be under the age of 25, so I'm actually too old to be in my own experiments. Do not tell me that I look over 25. So this is age of 25, because I need people performing at their best. And these are the kind of tests we're trying to see if someone would be good at a high-level task, such as to be an astronaut, or to be a pilot, or to be some type of task that requires really, really good focus. So the test that I'm going to show you guys today is only 3 years old. It came out in the United States about 3 years ago. And my belief is that it is now used, my belief is later. The truth is, it's now used for the U.S. Navy to discover which pilots are going to be the most successful at training. Why? Because it costs $11 million US dollars to train one pilot to fly a jet fighter. That's this test to see who's going to do well. On the other end of this test could also be used, in addition to other tests, to see whose attention is poor. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I wish I had a clicker because that means I now have to stop walking around and actually stand on the podium where I can click. Dr. Jamie, you can still hear me okay? Okay.
Loud and clear, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to switch microphones. All right. What is attentional control? Attentional control is the ability to focus on a task that requires some decision or judgment while ignoring irrelevant or distracting information. This is necessary for many daily work tasks. People must inhibit the information that is either distracting or irrelevant. Traditionally, this is done by presenting the person with true flanger or assignment tasks, and this is how we tell entire populations can they ignore irrelevant or inhibit irrelevant information. Those of you who have ever been to a workshop of mine, you guys have heard about inhibition, right? Okay. Those of you that have not been to a workshop of mine, do you know what the truth, the flanger, and assignment tasks are? Those of you who aren't saying anything, what category do I put you in? Okay, so who's never heard of these tasks? Who took my class and still doesn't know these tasks? All right, it's perfectly fine. I'm going to explain them all because I'm also explaining a different version of the tasks. But the reality is someone with ADHD is less likely to be able to ignore distracting information. So the problem with traditional tasks such as the truth, the flanger, and assignment is that they work great, right? These tasks have been around for decades and they work really, really well, right? Since before all of us were born. But at the end of the day, they're great for groups of people, old versus young, right? They can tell differences between people in groups, not necessarily individuals. So the purpose of the new test that I'm going to show you today is because it can really tell the difference between two people attentionally, and this is how we detect which pilots are going to do well in the U.S. Navy. So if we want to see is Shad going to do really well as a pilot versus Dr. Berry, we're going to give them both a test, and whoever does better, we're going to assume is going to actually pass the program and perform better at the end. So it's much, much better at detecting differences between people. So this testing system was initially published in 2022. Like I said, it's very, very new, and only a handful of papers have come out talking about it. It's developed by Randy Engel. I don't expect you guys to know who he is, but if you're in the field of cognitive psychology, he's kind of like the really, really big guy, and he has all of these people that he's created, graduate students that have gone on and are now professors, and there's just an entire group of people that believe he's really, really smart and follow his work. But here's the trick. They use conflict, and I'm going to demonstrate this shortly. They use conflict in both the stimulus and the response. That doesn't make any sense right now, but it will shortly. And the final and most important point is, as a cognitive psychologist, I spend a lot of time measuring people's response time. Who knew that? Who knew that I measure response times? You knew that? You knew that? Anybody else? Okay, so you knew that? When I'm having someone in front of a computer and I'm measuring their responses, I'm recording how fast they respond. By comparing differences between conditions, I can see which was harder, which was more difficult. Why? Because it took them longer. It took them longer, okay? The difference doesn't have to be very long. It can be a tenth of a second. But that's enough for me to know that, oh, this one was a little bit harder for this than this one, because they had to stop and then think about the response. So accuracy for these new tasks that I'm about to show you is more important than reaction time. I'm interested in whether or not the person gets the answer correct and how many they get correct. All right, let's start with the assignment task. So I'm going to ask you to look at this shape. Which direction does it point? I've given the answer, but which direction does it point? Okay, you guys are pointing this way. It's pointing left, correct? All right. Fairly straightforward. Some of you in this room have actually experienced this exact test that I'm talking about today. Simple enough. It doesn't matter what language you speak. It doesn't matter what culture you come from. That arrow is clearly pointing that direction. All right. What about this shape? Which direction is it pointing? Yellow, you mean? Okay. But it's on which side of the screen? Okay. So you see the confusion. Even though it's pointing the same direction, it's on the right side of the screen, although it's pointing to the left. Okay? Very confusing. All right. Which direction is this shape pointing? It's pointing to the right. What side of the screen is it on? It's on the right side of the screen. All right. Fairly simple. Which side of this? I'm sorry. Which direction is this shape pointing? Which side of the screen is it on? Okay. Do you guys think it'll be easier to respond to the shape when it's on the same side of the screen as the direction it's pointing? Yeah. Because then your brain doesn't have to stop and think. Left, right, I don't know which one. So that's a source of conflict. Your brain has to resolve conflict. Guess what we need to resolve conflict? Attention control. To resolve conflict, we need attention control. What do people with ADHD not have? Attention. Attention control. That's exactly right. Perfect. All right, so now it's going to get a little bit complicated. Which word below as the direction that the arrow is pointing? Right. So the one with the green check mark is the same direction. Okay. What side of the screen is it on? Right. What side of the screen is the arrow on? Left. Okay. So we have three things: the direction the arrow is pointing, the side of the screen is on, and the side of the screen the word is on. So now we've added another layer of conflict that our brain has to resolve before we can answer this question. All right, so that's the correct answer. What's the correct answer here? I've already given it to you. Yeah. Would this one be easier or harder than the previous one? Easier. Why? Because everything's happening on the right. It's on the right side of the screen, it's pointing to the right, and the word right is on the right side of the screen. So easy. This one. Can you see why left is okay? Because it's pointing to the left. What side of the screen is it on? Yes, so there's one source of conflict because it's on the left side of the screen. All right, let's try one more. All right, which direction is this pointing? What side of the screen is it on? What side of the screen is the word on? So how many sources of conflict are there in this one? There's two, right? The word right is on the left side of the screen, and the shape is on the left side of the screen. The only thing going right is the actual shape. So your brain is going, where did you go? Your brain's like, okay. This is why it takes a little bit longer. But we're really interested in accuracy. So we're going to move on into other tasks. But that was the assignment task. Do you guys feel comfortable with that? By the way, there's many different versions of this task. This task is as old as anything. It's been out for a long time. This is the new version because it adds words, which is another source of confusion. Now we're going to talk about the flanker task. All right. Oh, I actually remembered the subtitles for this one. I apologize that there were not subtitles in the previous file. So we have 5 arrows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We care about the 2 on the outside and the right and the left. You remember this one, don't you? Yes. Which direction direction are the outside arrows pointing? They're pointing this way, right? Okay. They're pointing to the left. Why are we called flanker? Why would this be called the flanker task? Anybody? I'm going to hand you a microphone.
I guess from the name, flankers will click like that, so I must respond as fast as the thinking. Just the listening.
That's a good answer, but I'm going more basic than that. Why do we call this a flanker task? You can just hold onto the microphone. Oh, give it to Shad. Shad, do you feel like doing the microphone for this session?
I think yeah, sure.
Okay, my other people are busy right now, so if I had your help, that'd be great.
So since like I'm a history teacher, like we study wars, and usually there's a tactic in war that's called flanking. So you actually go for both sides. So I think that it's called a flanker task because you focus on the arrows on the sides, not on the center.
That's correct. Very good, thank you. All right, so just hold on to that in case someone else has a question. If you see someone famous and they have bodyguards on the other side, they're flanking the boss. They're flanking the person they're protecting. So they're on the other side blocking you, right? Think of Messi's bodyguard. Have you seen that meme with Messi's bodyguard? He is there in an instant. That's the job of a flanker. So in this task, the flanker is blocking you from seeing. It's very easy to see because they're all pointing left. But imagine if the one in the middle was pointing in a different direction. For example, here, we have this one in the middle, but the two on the outside are pointing in the opposite direction. But for this task, we tell people, the one at the top, just look at the direction of the outside arrows. Now, let's look at the arrow in the middle. Which direction is it pointing? Which way?
Left.
It's pointing left. Is that hard or easy to say? It's easy, but it's harder than the other one. Why? Because the flankers are blocking you. That's exactly right. It's making it harder to see because the other ones are saying the other direction. All right, so now let's try this one more time. We have direction, we have arrows on the outside pointing in different direction. What direction are they pointing?
Right.
To the right, correct? Which one is this middle one pointing?
Left.
Left. This middle one?
Right.
Okay. That ended up on the outside is pointing. Sorry, that ended up in the wrong place. We're interested in the middle one. So in this particular case, you're looking at the top arrows on the outside and the bottom arrow in the middle. So my question is, the top arrow are pointing to the right. The bottom arrow, which one in the middle is going the same direction as the top? I gave you the answers. Correct. It's going the same direction. So now there's confusion all over the place. There's arrows pointing different directions. You're looking at the top, you're looking at the bottom. You're all confused. Let's try another one. Which direction are the outside arrows pointing? Okay. Now we go to the middle. Which direction is that one pointing in the middle?
Left.
Left. Okay. Which one is this one? The correct one in the middle? Right. So which one's going to be correct? That's exactly right. That one's going to be correct because the middle is pointing the same direction as the top. You see why you have to stop and think when you respond to this, and it's very confusing and tough? Okay. So this is what we call a conflict task. What do you need to resolve conflict? Attention control. What do people with ADHD not have? Okay, so if I give them this, I'm not asking them how you feel today. I'm measuring their responses and removing the human component of not knowing, not being able to say how you feel, what your attention actually is, which is a very personal, subjective thing. All right, one more. Can you guys see why the one on the right at the bottom is correct and the one on the left is incorrect? Yeah, so the one on the bottom is correct. Sorry, that's really loud. Because it's going the same direction as the outside arrows on the top. I'm giving you a brief overview. Those of you who have done this in the laboratory, you get the hang of it after a few trials, right? You get the hang of it. They keep telling you you're wrong. You learn how to do it. But it's not going to be easy. That's why this is used for Navy pilots. Because you only have 90 seconds to get as many right as you possibly can. All right. Last example is going to be the Stroop test. Who here has heard of the Stroop test? Okay, good. The Stroop test is relatively popular, relatively famous. It's been around for 90 years. I'm going to pick on somebody. Osama. What color is this word?
Blue.
It's blue. Yes. All right. What color does the word say?
Red.
You see the confusion? Okay. Conflict. So you're going to be slower to respond to this because your brain is blocking the word red in order to reply to the color blue. All right. So it's confusing because you're getting conflicting information. If that word said dog or car or man, would there be any confusion?
No.
No. The confusion is built in because it's a color. All right. I'm going to show you two words underneath. I'm going to ask you which of the two words underneath have the same name as this color. Sorry, which one has the same name?
Blue.
Yes. It also happens to be blue. So this one is not correct, even though it says the same word. Why? Because this color is not red. This color is blue. Let's try another one. Look at the color of this word. What color is this word?
Blue.
It's blue. What's the correct answer? The one on the right, correct? Is it annoying that it's written in red?
Yes.
It's a little annoying. It'd be so much easier if it were written in blue, right? But it's not, so we have to deal with that. All right. I think we have one more of this, and then we're going to move on. Which of these is the correct answer?
Red.
Yes, red is the correct answer because it's the same color as this word. So you see the source of the conflict. There's conflict in the stimulus, which is the word you're looking at. You have the word blue written in red, and there's conflict in the response. Here you have the word blue and blue, and here you have the word red and red. This is pretty straightforward, but you're trying to match it to this, and your brain is trying to bring itself back online to respond. Is this better than self-report?
Yes.
The answer is yes. The answer is yes. You don't have to worry about someone trying to understand how their brain works differently than other people. That's not objective. It's a very personal feeling. So tests like this can give you individual differences because everyone will get a different score on this test. Now our goal, myself and Dr. Jamie, is to look for the appropriate range of an attentional control score for someone who has ADHD and someone who does not have ADHD. So the score is simply based on the number they can get correct in 90 seconds on each test. Very, very fast. They get 30 seconds to practice and then 90 seconds to do the test. So you can be done with the entire thing in 10 minutes. That's as long as it would take them to answer the survey. So you don't even have to worry that they're taking too long, right? Like, oh my goodness, you're in the laboratory for 2 hours. No. It's very, very brief. I've given you some technical information here just because I want to be thorough. but I'm not going to test you on this later, unless you really want me to. You don't need to know these numbers, it's just to say that it positively correlates with attention. All right, last but not least, we're going to talk about the anti-saccade task. Monique and Salma know all about this task. Hello. So, in addition, we use the anti-saccade task using an eye tracker. Who here knows what an eye tracker is? Who here has been in an experiment with an eye tracker? Excellent. Not many people in the world can say that, and certainly not many people in Egypt. Excellent. All right, so you have to inhibit the natural reflexive response of looking at the object. The anti-saccade test is very sensitive. When they are not unable to inhibit this reflexive response, then they have made an error. And the score is based on the percentage of direction errors. Who here knows what a saccade is? It's an eye movement. I look this way, I make a saccade. I look this way, I make a saccade. It's just your eye moving. How many times per minute? How many times per second does your eye move? Anybody want to take a guess? Since I picked on Osama, I have to pick on Muhammad. Muhammad? How many times per second does your eye move?
I don't actually know. Maybe it's a big number.
So I reduced it to seconds instead of minutes. So how many times per second does our eye move?
Maybe 3 times.
What's up to get her? That's perfect.
Really?
It's 3 times. Maybe 4. Every 250, every quarter of a second, roughly our eye moves. That's a lot, isn't it? Think how fast a second is. So by the time you count a second, your eyes already moved 3 or 4 times. So this is a really, really good way to test whether or not someone can stop a reflexive response. All right, what does the anti-saccade test look like? It looks like this. The first thing you see is you see a point in the middle of the screen, and you're told to look at this point. This point is called a fixation. Meanwhile, your head is in a contraption. You haven't seen the new contraption yet. Did you see the new contraption? Okay, so we have a new head contraption. Yes, your head is in the contraption, and just your eyes are moving, and you're looking at the middle. Then the middle disappears, and a point appears either on the left or the right. Keeping your head perfectly still, you must move your eyes to the dot as soon as you can in the pro-saccade task. In the anti-saccade, the correct response is to move your eyes away. So look at nothing instead of the dot. How hard does that seem? It seems pretty hard. What would you need to tell yourself not to look at the dot? Attention control. What do people with ADHD not have?
Attention control.
This is why this test works. Every time they make an accident and look instead at the dot instead of away from it, they've made a mistake. But we need to measure it because that's really hard to determine if you're a researcher. All right, so here's the approximate equation that we're hoping to use for the attention control score. We don't actually know how we're going to do it ultimately. I spoke with the guy who developed these tests, and I came up with a number of ways to calculate the equation, and we're going to see which one fits the data best. But the preliminary calculations that you guys are going to see, we've been piloting this data, look something like this. We add up the score in the street, which is just the score they get at the end of the 90 seconds, plus the score in the flanker, plus the score in the side task. We multiply that by 0.80, and we subtract the percentage of direction errors made in the anti-saccade task. And the idea is, you now have a score, but it's not just ADHD, not ADHD. One person can be 83, another person can be 32, another person can be 46, another person can be 55. So everyone has their own score for how well they pay attention. Separate from just binary, do you have ADHD or do you not have ADHD? So here's some preliminary results from our laboratory. People who have ADHD versus people who are neurotypical. Here are the scores that they made in the Street Flanker and Simon tasks, as well as the percentage of direction errors. Subject 1, tested in English, female, Arabic, English bilingual, under 40 years old, right-handed and neurotypical. Subject 2, also tested in English. Subject 3, ADHD. I'm sorry, I switched these two. It should be like this. Subject 3 and 4 switched. And they were not on medication at the time. And as you can see, the attention control score is higher for the people that do not have ADHD. So this is a preliminary method that Dr. Jamie and I are working on for trying to assess in the laboratory ADHD in individuals. All right, so I think now's a good time to open up the floor for questions. We did hold off questions on Dr. Jamie's talk first, so if you had questions about that, you're welcome to ask them first, and then you can ask any questions about my talk in whatever order. There's no rules. All right, thank you very much. All right, who has questions?
Are the tasks that we discussed like administered orally, or is that a written task?
Those tasks are administered on a computer.
Okay.
So the person sits on not a laptop, but like a desktop computer, and they just use the mouse, and they just click the word or arrow that's correct.
And are these like found online, like how the other ADHD screening questionnaire that we found is commonly found for free online, or are these?
No, they're very new. They're not quite online yet.
And how can you get access to them?
Right now, they're accessible in the laboratory, in our laboratory here at AUC. I'm hoping to have a version of them online soon. I'm working on getting questions in that timing, in that 90 seconds. So that's really the barrier, is how many can you get right in 90 seconds and then score. Yeah.
And then that score at the end is like, is it correlated to a family score or is it used and then?
Working on that.
Okay.
Yeah, working around that. Yeah, just piloting data. So that's right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
I just have a question for those people who are doing the ASRS, the ADHD scale. I just wanted to know, I work with clinical populations, so I remember that doctor said that he could not present the Arabic version, but I'm truly interested because in many of the ADHD population, other population, they don't know English, so I was kind of curious if it does exist on the World something online platform you mentioned, and we just do it present in Arabic, or it's only available in Arabic or being translated yet?
So if you want to follow up with me afterwards, I've seen both Arabic and English versions of it, and I can share.
Okay, thank you so much. And then my second question regarding the attention control as you've been presenting, it's evolving in my mind as what I understand as selective attention and cognitive inhibition. I was just wondering if these are sort of synonyms to each other, or attention control is something else?
So it's something else. I think the way you're thinking of selective attention is another phenomenon altogether.
Like the attentional blindness, that's for example silence.
You're thinking divided attention, right, Simon, you're thinking that task right here. This is a completely different task, and I could go into the background because it's also related to working memories and other things that the published papers have been talking about. I didn't want to go too much in detail, so if you want to follow me with that too, I can definitely share with you. But it's a different thing. You're thinking of like the door task, and you're thinking of the girl task, and you're thinking of the magic task where people are looking
But we don't require attention control and selective attention tasks, don't we?
I don't know that we would call it attention control, strictly speaking. Okay, I think that's a bigger conversation.
Okay.
That's a good question.
And cognitive inhibition, because I think what I usually used to understand about the street test particularly, that we're testing cognitive inhibition.
Yes.
So is it closer to the attention control that is test or
Yeah, so inhibition is executive function, and that's something that people can struggle with, is if they're not able to ignore irrelevant information. That needing to inhibit irrelevant information is something that is an executive function task. So for example, as a bilingual, I'm assuming you speak Arabic.
Sorry?
I'm assuming you speak Arabic.
Yeah, of course.
But you're inhibiting right now, what are you inhibiting in order to speak to me? You're inhibiting Arabic words, right?
I mean, yes, I use this flavor, so I used to use it, and sometimes I struggle to inhabit Arabic words.
Ah,
I
okay.
mean, the English, to inhabit the English words.
Okay. Well, but the larger point is your brain has to, in order to respond to me in English, it has to inhibit the other languages that you possibly use. So these are all under the heading of executive function, which is part of, inhibition is part of executive function. And there's a lot of other things, and we could have a whole other conversation about that. Yeah. What is your name, by the way?
Ruin.
Okay, so when you follow up with me, thank you, sorry. Any other questions?
So I would like to know if I get you right or not. I think that selective attention is more about sensory stimulus, while the attention control is more of cognitive, on cognitive level. So the conflict does not happen on the sensory level, right? So it's more easy for me to be attentive more to the sensory stimulus, while on the cognitive level I feel the conflict. So it's more objective, right?
Okay, so I think what you're saying is the sensory stimulus is what we are avoiding when there is a selective attention task, such as the girl task. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And then you're saying this one right here is inhibition on a non-sensory level? Is that what you're saying?
That's what I think.
Okay. But here's the thing, the
It's
nature...
both.
Probably, and we need to know more about this.
Yeah.
The nature of this is definitely a perceptual conflict, right? So the idea that in the same stimulus, you have two conflicting pieces of information, and your brain has to resolve this conflict, that is an executive function task. Selective attention is, you're not necessarily given a specific task, pay attention to this individual's face, pay attention to this individual's clothing. It's more that our brain will ignore that information because it's not relevant. So we could talk about the door study, like when they have someone on this side of the door and then they ask direction to the person and then they switch the person and no one notices. No one told that person to actually pay attention to their face or their clothes or their hair. As long as they're similar enough, the person is not really going to pay attention to it. So the issue is here they're being told what to pay attention to, and the selective attention they're not really being told. It's just, it shows what our brain ignores. I know, there's a lot going on.
I have a question.
Yes?
I'm right here. I'm right here. Okay, so my question is, like, I understood that you're still working on, like, understanding the scales with your sport, but would it be possible that later on when you are able to distinguish the threshold between the typical and the ADHD, would you also be able to identify the different types of ADHD using the scales?
That's a really good question. Dr. Jamie, do you have any thoughts on that?
I've got some thoughts, but no empirical evidence I can point to. I'm not sure that it would necessarily distinguish between the inattentive type and the hyperactive impulsive type. However, there is literature published recently where a research group did a they use machine learning to identify different subtypes of cognitive impairment amongst people with ADHD. And there is a subtype that show predominantly attentional disorders. So ostensibly this application may be able to identify that subtype, but just to be clear, it's not the inattentive subtype of ADHD. So there appears to be different cognitive phenotypes for ADHD. And whilst attentional control is important across all of them, this application, I'm sensing, is likely to detect those with more of the attentional deficit cognitive phenotype with ADHD. I know that doesn't directly answer your question, but that's my hunch.
Thank you.
Shad, I really like that question. That's a good one. Any other questions before we wrap up? No other questions? Oh, yes, go ahead. I'll hear you.
Did these tests also like test for impulsivity?
Oh, that's a good question. What did you hear, Dr. Jamie? What would you say?
I think yes, because he said that like, it could check like the severity level of inattention, like that specific subtype of ADHD.
Yeah.
But like I was thinking, if someone like in a time test in 90 seconds they have to get as many answers as possible. Maybe they'll try to like figure out a pattern. Most probably there isn't a pattern, and they'll just like answer it right away, and maybe that answer will be wrong because they're impulsive. So does that mean it can test for impulsivity?
So to answer your question, when you think of it in the mechanics of it, that's correct. The reason is because they're clicking, and people can make impulsive clicks. So if you think of it like that, yes, because the score is automatically taken down whenever they get one wrong, and it's subtracted, so someone can actually end up with a negative score. I've had people get negative scores on individual tests, and so that would count against their total score. So yes, if they're impulsive and they click, even when they're not sure of the answer, then yeah, that would be reflected in that way, yes.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, any other questions? All right, so as you guys know, we do have the Experimental Psychology Conference coming up right after this. I'm delighted that we finished on time. And I just want to say thank you to my collaborator, Dr. Jamie, who took the time out of his evening to call all the way from Australia and to participate in our workshop. All right, thank you very much, Dr. Jamie, and thank you guys for coming, and you're welcome to attend the upcoming conference that will be starting in about 45 minutes.